My sister backed my cheating ex in court, forcing me to pay child support for a kid that wasn't mine. So when I caught her cheating on her husband, I didn't miss the chance to get revenge. I'll be upfront. I hate my sister. And yeah, I know how that sounds, but it wasn't always this way. Lena is my older sister, and growing up, I looked up to her a lot. She was the cool sibling, the one who always had my back, or so I thought. But as time passed, I learned the hard way how wrong I was. The real turning point? My marriage. I was married to my ex-wife, Rachel, for 2 years before everything blew up in my face. I still remember the exact moment I found out she was cheating on me. It was like one of those gut punch scenes from a movie, only worse because it was my life. I was scrolling through her messages one evening, not even snooping, just looking for a photo she'd sent me, when I stumbled upon a conversation with her male best friend. They'd been friends for 8 years. And there it was. Explicit texts. Sexting. The kind of messages that made my stomach turn. Rachel had always told me he was just a friend. Someone who'd been there for her forever. Sure, I'd felt pangs of jealousy now and then. I'm only human, but I trusted her. We built our relationship on that trust. So, seeing those texts, it was like the floor dropped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage crumbled in an instant. I confronted her that night. She broke down immediately, ugly crying, apologizing over and over, swearing it was a one-time mistake. She said it didn't mean anything, promised to block him, and assured me it would never happen again. Despite how angry and heartbroken I was, I wanted to believe her. I really did. We started going to marriage counseling because I was desperate to understand why this had happened. If there was any way to fix what was broken. And for a while, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. Rachel seemed genuinely remorseful. She took responsibility, became more open, more attentive. For a bit, it felt like we were actually making progress. I convinced myself to stay. I told myself that people make mistakes and that love was worth fighting for. But, as I'm sure you've already guessed, that was a huge mistake. It wasn't long before the cracks started to show again. One evening, Rachel told me she was heading out to meet a coworker for dinner. But something felt off. She was acting weird, too cheerful, too rehearsed. That gut feeling? It hit me hard. So, after she left, I called the coworker. Just to check. And yeah, you guessed it. The coworker had no idea what I was talking about. I felt this wave of nausea hit me. She was lying. Again. And I knew exactly who she was really meeting. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, but I still called her. Once. Twice. 5 times. She ignored every call. Hours passed. I just sat there, alone in our living room, staring at the door, waiting. When she finally stumbled in, drunk out of her mind, she didn't even acknowledge me. She barely managed to take off her shoes before heading straight to the bedroom. It was like I didn't exist. I sat there, feeling invisible, heartbroken, furious, all of it hitting me at once. Later that night, as I was about to head to bed, I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand. She had passed out fully dressed, makeup smudged, still reeking of alcohol. I covered her with a blanket, but my eyes kept darting back to the buzzing phone. Curiosity, no dread, got the better of me. I picked it up and saw a message from him. Her best friend. That was so much fun. We should do this more often. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the emojis burning into my brain. It wasn't even subtle. It was like a sick joke. I sat there, staring at that message, my stomach in knots. There was no way a guy would send something like that, complete with a tongue and sweat drop emoji, unless something serious had gone down. My mind raced with all the worst-case scenarios, each one worse than the last. I felt physically sick, like my chest was caving in. My worst fears were no longer just fears. They were reality. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned, my brain replaying every little moment from the past 2 years, wondering how I had been so blind. I kept picturing them together, laughing at me behind my back. Every time I closed my eyes, those images would flash through my mind, and I'd feel that crushing weight all over again. By the time morning came, I was running on fumes, but I knew I had to confront Rachel. There was no way around it. When she finally woke up, hungover and groggy, I laid it all out. I asked her directly about the night before, about the lies, and about that text. At first, she went into full defense mode. She tried to flip it on me, claiming that I was the one with issues. Why would you even call my coworker? That's a total invasion of privacy, she snapped, trying to make me feel like the bad guy. Classic gaslighting. And yeah, it hurt, but I wasn't going to fall for it. I brought up the message again, demanding an explanation. She laughed it off, saying, "That's just how we joke. You're reading way too much into it. Seriously, Mark, you're acting crazy." But I could see the panic behind her eyes. That's when I played my final card. I told her I'd reach out to her best friend directly and ask him about it. The color drained from her face. She got visibly anxious and started stammering, trying to convince me that it wasn't necessary, that I was overreacting. And that's when the truth finally came out. Rachel broke down. Through tears and gasps, she confessed that she'd been wanting to see him for a while and that, yes, they had made out that night after getting drunk. It felt like a punch straight to the gut. But what made it worse was how she tried to justify it. She claimed that our marriage had gotten boring and that she was just seeking a little excitement. Like that somehow made it okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her point blank that her actions, the sexting, the lying, the betrayal, were the reasons our marriage had fallen apart. It wasn't boredom or some lack of excitement. It was her. She kept pleading, insisting she could fix things. She promised to cut ties with him for good, go to counseling again, do whatever it takes. But I was done. The trust was shattered beyond repair. I told her she needed to move out. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said, but I knew there was no going back. Thankfully, we had a prenup, so at least I was protected financially. That was one small silver lining in this dumpster fire of a situation. Despite her tears and the attempts from her friends to guilt me into forgiving her, I stood firm. I packed her bags and kicked her out. Watching her walk out that door was both devastating and liberating. And just like that, my marriage was over. I know this might come off as harsh, but the pain was unbearable. I really believed Rachel and I would grow old together. Her betrayal didn't just break my heart. It shattered me in ways I didn't know were possible. I ended up confiding in my parents and my older sister, Lena, about everything that had happened. They were shocked, to say the least. None of them had seen it coming, and they immediately assured me they'd support me through the divorce. For a brief moment, that gave me some comfort. At least I wasn't going through this alone. But something felt off. Lena, usually the first to give her opinion on anything, was oddly quiet. She barely said a word as I explained how I found out about Rachel's cheating. That struck me as strange. So, I asked her what she thought, especially since she had been close to Rachel during our marriage. And her response? It blindsided me. Instead of expressing outrage or even sympathy, Lena asked, "Are you sure you want to go through with the divorce? Rachel doesn't really have anyone else. She's alone." I sat there in disbelief. Was she seriously defending Rachel? The same Rachel who had lied to me and cheated multiple times? I told Lena flat out that I didn't care about Rachel's lack of a support system. She had made her choices. She was the one who betrayed me, repeatedly. Why did it seem like my sister was more worried about my cheating wife than about me, her own brother? Lena tried to backpedal a bit, saying she was only trying to make sure I wasn't rushing into anything. She told me she had always thought Rachel and I were meant for each other, and that maybe I'd regret making such a final decision. I remember just sitting there, feeling a mix of confusion and anger, but I didn't press the issue further. The whole situation was already emotionally draining, and I needed to focus on the divorce. For a while, it seemed like things were moving in the right direction. My lawyer was confident we had everything under control. The prenup would protect me, and Rachel had no grounds to fight the divorce. But then, the bombshell dropped. Rachel told me she was pregnant. I was floored, completely blindsided. I remember sitting there, speechless, as she and her lawyer urged me to halt the divorce proceedings for the sake of the baby. She claimed she wanted to raise the child in a traditional family, that we could make things work, for the child's sake. I wasn't buying it. I told her, point blank, that there was no way this kid was mine. She insisted she hadn't been with anyone else, that the make-out session with her best friend was just that and nothing more. She tried to spin it like I was being cruel for denying the baby, but I knew exactly what was going on. This was a desperate attempt to trap me, to guilt me into staying and to secure financial support. I held my ground. I told her that after she gave birth, I'd get a paternity test, and that would settle things once and for all. But then her lawyer pulled a legal curveball. He argued that because Rachel and I were still legally married, the law automatically considered me the father unless proven otherwise. They said they'd be seeking child support regardless. My lawyer was furious. He pushed back hard, arguing that without a paternity test, they had no case. But deep down, we both knew how flawed the system could be, especially in situations like this. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Rachel's lawyer went full throttle, painting me as a deadbeat trying to dodge responsibility. And then came the worst blow. They brought in witnesses to back Rachel's claims. One of them was my sister, Lena. I had no idea she was even going to be there. At first, I thought she was just there to support me, but when she took the stand, my stomach dropped. She testified against me. She told the court that she had known Rachel for years and didn't believe she'd ever go as far as actually sleeping with someone else. She said Rachel was still in love with me and insisted that the child had to be mine. Hearing my own sister take Rachel's side, in court was soul-crushing. I felt completely alone. Lena knew exactly how much I had loved Rachel and how deeply she had torn me apart. Yet there she was, standing in court, defending Rachel's lies. I couldn't let it go. After the court session, I confronted her outside. I was still shaking with rage, my head spinning with disbelief. How could you? I asked, my voice barely steady. You knew what she did to me. You knew how much it hurt, and you still testified for her. Lena didn't even flinch. She stood there, arms crossed, like she had rehearsed her response. I did what I thought was right, she said flatly. One day, you'll understand. I snapped. Understand? You threw me under the bus. I might end up paying child support for a kid who isn't even mine. All because of your testimony. Her face hardened. You're being cruel. It's not the baby's fault. Someone has to think about the child. Rachel's going to struggle without support. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was more worried about Rachel's finances than about the emotional hell I was going through. Then she dropped the worst line of all. You wouldn't get it. You don't have maternal instincts like I do. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Maternal instincts? Really? That was her excuse? I'm your brother, Lena. I reminded her, my voice shaking. I'm the one who was betrayed, not Rachel. And you chose her over me. But Lena just shook her head, acting like I was being unreasonable. Even my parents, who had been trying to stay neutral, couldn't believe what she'd done. They told her flat out that she had no right to go behind my back and testify against me. But the damage was done. Her testimony had swayed the court, making it seem like I was trying to dodge responsibility. And that was all it took. The judge ruled in favor of Rachel. I was now legally responsible for child support until the kid turned 18, even though I had already gotten a paternity test that proved I wasn't the father. But because Rachel was pregnant while we were still married, the court held me accountable. It's been years now, and I'm still paying child support for a kid who looks nothing like me. A constant, painful reminder of everything I lost. But what really eats at me? It's not Rachel. It's Lena. She's the reason I'm trapped in this mess. Since that day, I've cut her off completely. I refuse to talk to her, no matter how many times my parents beg me to move on and let it go. Family events? I don't even acknowledge her. And, honestly, most of our extended family feels the same way. A few of my cousins told me they couldn't believe what she did and have kept their distance from her too. Lena has whined to my parents about being isolated, saying she was just doing what was best for the child. But no one's buying it. Her sympathy plays fall flat. She's the one who made her bed. She got married last year to her longtime boyfriend, Daniel. Of course, I didn't go to the wedding, and neither did several other family members. My parents told me Lena was crushed by the low turnout, but what did she expect? Actions have consequences. After the wedding, she and Daniel started trying for a baby. My parents couldn't stop talking about how excited they were at the thought of finally having a grandchild from our bloodline. I stayed out of it, until fate stepped in. A few months ago, I traveled to a nearby town for a work conference. After a long day of meetings, some coworkers and I decided to hit the hotel bar to unwind. And that's when I saw her. Lena, sitting at the bar with an older man I didn't recognize. She hadn't seen me, so I stayed back, watching. And what I saw, it made my blood run cold. Sitting at the bar with an older man I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe it was a work meeting, but then I noticed how close they were sitting. She leaned in, whispering something into his ear that made him burst out laughing. I could feel my stomach tightening. The way they were looking at each other, the body language, it wasn't professional. It wasn't even friendly. It was flirty. Way too flirty. I sat back in my chair, out of her line of sight, and watched for a bit. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. Lena, my married sister, was clearly flirting with this guy. They were way too comfortable, exchanging smiles, laughing like they were on a first date. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone. I knew how this would sound without proof, and after everything I'd been through, I wasn't going to risk it. I snapped a few pictures, making sure to capture both of their faces clearly. I felt gross doing it, but I needed undeniable evidence. I kept watching as the drinks kept flowing. Eventually, after about an hour, the man gestured toward the elevator, and Lena nodded. She grabbed her purse and followed him without hesitation. I sat there in shock. I knew exactly what was happening. She was about to cheat on Daniel. For a split second, I wanted to run over, stop her, yell, anything. But then I remembered how she had backed Rachel in court, how she had thrown me under the bus without a second thought. Cheaters never learn unless they're exposed. I knew what I had to do. When I got home from the conference, I spent a couple of days debating my next move. But in the end, I knew I couldn't just let Daniel be blindsided like I was. He deserved to know the truth, even if it meant blowing things up. I found him on Facebook and sent him a friend request. I wasn't sure if he'd accept, but a few hours later, the notification popped up, request accepted. My heart raced as I typed out the message. I kept it simple. Hey Daniel, this is Mark, Lena's brother. I know this is really out of the blue, but I need to talk to you about something important. Please don't mention this to Lena yet. Here's my number, call me when you can. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Hey, Mark? What's this about? His voice was cautious but polite. I apologized for reaching out like this and for not attending their wedding. I told him I wished this conversation was under better circumstances. He was quiet for a moment before asking, "So, what's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him what I had seen at the hotel bar. I was careful not to immediately use the word cheating. For all I knew, they had some kind of open marriage. I didn't want to make assumptions. But as I described the scene, Daniel's tone changed. He started asking specific questions, what Lena was wearing, how the guy looked, whether I was sure they left together. I could hear the tension in his voice, the same kind of disbelief I'd felt when I first found out about Rachel. I actually took some pictures, I told him. I didn't want to believe it either, but, yeah. I sent the photos over while we were still on the call. The silence that followed was deafening. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke. "Well, I didn't expect this," he muttered. "Thank you for telling me. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. That caught me off guard." "What do you mean?" He hesitated before answering. "Lena's been distant for a while now. I thought maybe it was stress, but I guess I was wrong." Then he asked me something that hit hard. "Why would you even tell me? I mean, you and Lena aren't exactly on good terms, right?" I sighed. "Because I've been in your shoes, man. My ex-wife cheated on me too. And the worst part? Lena sided with her, even testified against me in court. That's why I'm stuck paying child support for a kid who isn't even mine." I laid it all out, how Rachel had lied, how Lena had made things worse by backing her up, and how I wasn't about to let someone else go through the same hell I did. Daniel was silent again, taking it all in. Then he said something that floored me. "Lena told me a completely different story. She said your marriage was already falling apart and that Rachel made a mistake because you guys weren't even intimate anymore. She made it seem like you were the problem." I felt my blood boil. Of course, Lena had spun the story to make herself look better. "Yeah," I replied, my voice low. "That's not what happened." Hearing Daniel repeat Lena's twisted version of my marriage made my blood boil. She hadn't just lied to him, she'd painted me as the villain in my own story. I took a deep breath before responding. "Daniel, I need you to know something. Rachel didn't cheat on me once, it happened twice. And it wasn't some mistake, because we weren't intimate or whatever Lena told you. She broke my trust over and over again. That's why we divorced." There was a long pause on the other end of the call before Daniel spoke. I had a feeling something was off. "Thanks for telling me the truth." He sounded more hurt than surprised. Like deep down, he already knew but needed confirmation. "I'm not sticking around for this," he added firmly. "I won't stay married to someone who cheats." It was a relief to hear that. At least one of us wouldn't get trapped in the same nightmare I'd been stuck in. But of course, the fallout was immediate. Within days, my phone was blowing up with calls from my parents. Voicemail after voicemail, all with the same message. How could you do this to Lena? According to them, I had ruined her life. She was now facing a divorce, and they blamed me for it. They kept throwing around phrases like family should come first, and you've destroyed any chance of us having a grandchild from her. That last one hit me hard. A grandchild? That was their biggest concern? Not the fact that Lena had cheated on her husband, but that I had interfered, and now they might not get a grandkid? I didn't hold back this time. I called them out. Maybe instead of obsessing over grandkids, you should focus on why your daughter thought cheating was okay in the first place. That's on her, not me. But it didn't stop there. Lena, of course, couldn't let things go. She sent me a vile text, calling me a spiteful little boy who couldn't keep his nose out of other people's business. She even had the audacity to suggest that Rachel's infidelity during my marriage was somehow justified, that I deserved everything that had happened to me. It took every ounce of self-control not to respond immediately. I was seething, my hands shaking as I read and reread her words. It took me hours to calm down, but one thing was crystal clear. There was no coming back from this. But then, karma came knocking. A few weeks later, I found out that Lena was pregnant. The irony wasn't lost on me. She claimed the baby was Daniel's, but he wasn't buying it. He was refusing to take any responsibility until a paternity test confirmed it. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. Soon after, Daniel reached out to me again. He asked if I'd be willing to testify for him when the situation inevitably ended up in court. After all, I had the photos, undeniable proof of Lena's infidelity. I didn't even hesitate. Of course, I'll testify. It wasn't just about revenge, though, yeah, I won't lie, there was a part of me that felt a sense of justice. But more than that, I didn't want Daniel to go through what I did. Stuck paying for a child that might not even be his, all while being painted as the villain. Since then, the pressure from my parents and Lena has been relentless. They've been calling, texting, even showing up at my place, begging me not to testify. The same old line, family comes before everything. It's almost laughable. Where was that loyalty when Lena testified against me? Where was family first when I was being dragged through court, forced to pay child support for a kid who wasn't mine? I'm done playing nice. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about holding people accountable. I'm standing my ground. I'll testify for Daniel. And maybe, just maybe, Lena will finally understand what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you thought you could trust. Update 1. I'm honestly shocked by how divided the responses to my post have been. I figured most people would get where I was coming from, but apparently not. I've seen a surprising number of comments, mostly from women, trying to convince me to support my sister, even though she clearly cheated. To those people, shame on you. Let me make one thing crystal clear. I would have had zero issues paying child support if my ex-wife, Rachel, had proven the kid was actually mine. But she didn't. She knew the child wasn't mine. We hadn't even been intimate for months before she got pregnant. Yet she forced me into this nightmare just because she couldn't afford to raise the kid on her own. And the worst part? I never had solid proof that she slept with her best friend. All I had was one suggestive text. That's all. It wasn't enough in court, and I've been stuck paying child support ever since. That's why I hate Lena, my own sister, for screwing me over and testifying for Rachel. She helped trap me in this mess. And now? She's out there doing the same thing to her husband, Daniel. I won't stand by this time. I'm going to testify against her and make sure Daniel doesn't suffer the same fate I did. If the kid turns out to be his after a paternity test, I have no doubt he'll step up. He's a decent guy. But until that's confirmed, why should he be forced to pay child support for a baby that might not even be his? And unlike my situation, Lena and Daniel don't even have a prenup. If they divorce, and let's be honest, that's where this is heading, Daniel will likely have to pay her alimony. That's bad enough without adding child support for someone else's kid on top of it. I know I'm doing the right thing. And thankfully, the majority of comments here seem to agree with me. Update 2. It's been a while, but I finally have some news. Today, I testified against Lena in court. I laid everything out. How I caught her at that hotel bar, the photos I took, the whole story. I wasn't holding anything back. I could feel her eyes burning into me the entire time I was on the stand. She didn't say a word, but I could see the rage in her face. Her lawyer tried to dismiss my testimony, saying I was biased and holding a grudge. But the judge accepted my evidence. Now it's all up to the court to decide. But I really hope my testimony helps Daniel avoid being forced to pay for a child that might not even be his. Of course, this has only made things worse with my parents. My mom called me afterward, crying, saying she and my dad were heartbroken that I'd actually gone through with it. She told me they'd hoped I wouldn't do this to Lena. It made me sick. I reminded her that neither she nor my dad fought for me this hard when Lena took Rachel's side during my divorce. They forgave Lena for everything, but now, suddenly, I'm the bad guy because I refused to let her ruin someone else's life the way she helped ruin mine. I told my mom flat out that I didn't need parents who would pick my cheating sister over me. Since then, I've cut off all contact. No calls, no texts, nothing. And honestly, I feel lighter. Update 3. Back again with the latest, and for once, it's good news. Daniel was officially cleared of paying child support to Lena. I won't lie. I felt a wave of satisfaction hearing that verdict. Finally, someone avoided the nightmare I've been stuck in for years. I know Lena must be furious right now, but I honestly don't care. Actions have consequences. To clear up a few things based on questions from the comments. Do I have a relationship with Rachel's son? No. Even though I'm still legally paying child support, I want nothing to do with him. If he reaches out when he's older, I'll tell him the truth about his mom. Until then, I'm staying out of it. Am I talking to my parents? Nope. Still no contact. And honestly, I feel so much better without their constant guilt trips. Has Lena confronted me since the trial? Not even once. I'm guessing she's too embarrassed. Will she be getting alimony from Daniel? Yeah, unfortunately. Since they didn't have a prenup, she'll get alimony. But at least she won't be getting child support on top of that. Do my parents have any relationship with Rachel's kid? No. They know he isn't biologically their grandchild, and they've kept their distance. As for Lena's unborn child, I have no idea if they'll accept that kid or not. That's where things stand right now. It's been a mess, but at least someone got out of it without being trapped the way I was.